Jock, are you all right there, Carolyn? Carolyn Daly, Jock Anderson, thanks for being with us. I'm back tomorrow.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Now, Heidi Akine, what's New Zealand's roadmap out of COVID? Australia has one, so where's ours? We talked to the government's COVID business advisor on relaxing border restrictions, the need for purpose-built MIQ, and how even he can't get a spot in managed isolation. 150,000 Pfizer doses arrived today, so how hard is it to get vaccinated if you're in a priority group? Meanwhile, Fiji's main mortuary is full as COVID cases continue to rise there. Housing advocates say we should be ashamed with a record spike in the number of children living in motels. And it's back to pen and paper for more than 100 North Island kindies hit in a ransomware attack.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. New Zealanders trapped in New South Wales and Queensland will be able to return from Saturday as long as they meet a number of conditions. Cabinet has extended the travel pause with New South Wales indefinitely. The decision to extend the pause with Queensland will be reviewed on Wednesday, and people who normally live in New Zealand will be able to come home from Saturday. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says passengers must test negative for COVID-19 before departure, be non-symptomatic, and can't travel if they are a close contact or have visited a location of interest.
There are layers there that we require of them to give us extra added satisfaction that they pose minimal risk to New Zealand.
The travel pause with Western Australia and Northern Territory will be lifted from Saturday. The Director General of the Foreign Intelligence Agency says cyber criminal gangs are gaining expertise more in common with state-sponsored attacks. Hundreds of groups and companies were hit by the attack on the Kaseya software. Government Communications Security Bureau Director General Andrew Hampton says such incidents are becoming more sophisticated.
The distinction between criminal actors and state actors is becoming increasingly blurred as capabilities that previously were only the preserve of state actors are now falling into the hands of criminal groups. We're seeing that particularly with these types of attacks which are focused on supply chains.
Meanwhile, the North Island Kindergarten Group is trying to gauge the extent of the cyber attack on its computer system. The Chief Executive of the Free Kindergarten Association, Amanda Colston, says more than 100 member kindergartens are using pen and paper while the IT provider sweeps their system.
They're going through every one of our machines and working their way through and identifying if anything's happened. There are so many unknowns with this attack.
A cyber criminal group based in Russia appears to have posted on the dark web demanding millions of dollars in bitcoins as ransom for the global attack at the weekend. The number of children living in motels has jumped by nearly 500 in just a few months, but the government says the data doesn't show the whole picture. The latest figures show there were more than 4,300 children living in emergency accommodation at the end of March, an increase of 480 on the end of December. Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni says data can change significantly each day.
Numbers of children in emergency accommodation for less than 4 weeks. That went from 465 last quarter to 804 this quarter. If we look at the 3 to 6 months, it's gone up by 86 children. So we'll keep watching the space, but you have to watch it for a period of time to be able to ascertain whether or not there is a trend.
Carmel Sepuloni says overall emergency accommodation costs and demand have dropped over the past 2 quarters. Some Fijian workers are forced to continue going to work despite the rapid spread of COVID-19 on the country's main island. Sunday saw another record infection rate with 522 new cases and 3 more deaths reported, taking the toll to 30. There have been more than 6,000 cases since mid-April. A retail worker in Suva, who doesn't want his name used, says he still has to go to work on reduced hours in order to feed his family, even though community transmission is rife. Police have seized multiple guns and arrested one person after a raid on a house linked to the Black Power gang in northern Hawke's Bay. It was part of a special operation to disrupt gang violence in Wairoa. In the past month, there have been at least 5 shootings where guns have been fired at homes around the town. In one case, 2 children were asleep in a house south of the town when it was fired upon from a vehicle. The children weren't injured. The Cabinet Minister, Kiri Allen, says her 3-year-old daughter was a constant source of light during her cancer treatment. The Labour MP has returned to Parliament today after undergoing 9 weeks of treatment. The 37-year-old says she's stoked to be back and there's a fire in her belly to get back to the mahi. It's 4 minutes past 5. The All Blacks have called in Chiefs forward Samisoni Taukeaho as injury cover for hooker Asafo Aumua, who was reporting concussion symptoms. Aumua played the majority of the second half of the one-off test against Tonga in Auckland after replacing starting hooker Dane Coles. With Cody Taylor also in the All Blacks squad, Taukeaho is unlikely to feature against Fiji in Dunedin this week. Meanwhile, young Fijian winger Manasa Mataele has left the Crusaders for a 2-year deal with Perth-based Super Rugby side the Western Force. Roger Federer feels he's finally found his rhythm and that mentally he's in a good space heading into the second week of Wimbledon. The 6th seed will play 23rd seed Lorenzo Sonego of Italy in the 4th round tonight. 39-year-old Federer played just one tournament last year. He had a limited build-up to Wimbledon and struggled through the first 2 rounds. But the 8-time Wimbledon winner feels his 3rd round win over Briton Cameron Norrie was a turning point and he's almost in a moment of zen.
I just felt very much at peace out there, sort of at tranquility, I guess. I know it's the big picture that matters, and I was sitting on the change of ends and it was just empty thoughts, no bad, no positive, just sitting there and relaxing, and this is how I want it to be, I think that for me is a very positive sign, to be honest.
Roger Federer. Also in action tonight are top seeds Novak Djokovic and Ash Barty. That's the news.
Taking aim at China.
We know that they are slaves. We also know that they're being used to harvest organs.
A target for ransomware.
You'd turn on your machine and you just wouldn't be able to access any of your files or information. It just doesn't work.
And England zeroing in.
There is genuine belief here that England can win their first major trophy since the World Cup in 1966.
Hitting the back of the net. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Partly cloudy, areas of fog. Isolated showers north of Waikato today, spreading everywhere tomorrow morning and turning to rain tomorrow night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, partly cloudy, showers developing tomorrow night. Gale northerlies developing tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough and Buller, a few showers developing tonight and turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, high cloud, severe gale nor'westerlies developing tonight. Scattered rain developing tomorrow afternoon south of Christchurch. Otago and Southland cloudy, occasional rain developing tomorrow morning, snow lowering to 400 metres tomorrow night. Westland and Fiordland, heavy rain spreading north tonight, easing to isolated showers in Westland tomorrow night. Snow lowering to 400 metres in Fiordland tomorrow night. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā e hoa. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The main mortuary in Fiji is full as COVID continues to rip through the community. Back here, 150,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine arrived today, and the Trans-Tasman bubble eases open just enough for Kiwis to get home. But first tonight, the government's own COVID business advisor can't go offshore for business because MIQ spots are booked up, meaning he wouldn't be able to get back into New Zealand. And Rob Fyfe believes it's time to look at purpose-built facilities. Checkpoint has spoken to businesses who believe MIQ and border restrictions are costing millions in lost trade. Last week, the Aussie PM unveiled a 4-phase pathway out of COVID. Under phase 3, COVID would be treated like the flu or any other infectious disease with more relaxed travel rules, raising the question, What is New Zealand's plan? Rob Fyfe says he'd like to see border restrictions relaxed by the end of this year and beginning of next. But the former Air New Zealand boss is warning businesses, even when the border does open, they should be prepared for it to snap shut at any point.
Businesses are keen to get the border open, obviously, as quickly as we can. But we need to do that in a way that is safe. You know, the last thing that businesses want is flip-flop, on again, off again. And that's the biggest risk if we go too early.
So what's the plan? Do we have a plan?
Well, from my perspective, we have a plan, but the plan's really simple, right? We just need to get everyone vaccinated. There is no other solution to being able to open the border safely. So that is the number one focus. And the most important thing that I send the message to business that they can be doing is helping to support their employees to get vaccinated as soon as it's available.
Do we know how a more relaxed border would work in New Zealand?
So there's a lot of work going on the specifics, but step one is you need to have a high level of vaccination within your country, and that's clearly evident in Australia's plan as well. Then what's likely to happen is that the government will look at a graduated risk profile. So, you know, if you're a vaccinated New Zealander where we can validate your vaccination and you're travelling to a low-risk country, whatever a low-risk country might be, and coming back to New Zealand, then the border's likely to open for you well before it opens to someone coming from a high-risk country that still has a lot of COVID, potentially new variants emerging, and we can't validate their vaccination status. So I suspect we'll see the border open progressively, and that will be the case for most countries. But the reality, as I say, is the first and most important step is we just need to get the vast, vast majority of New Zealanders vaccinated.
But modelling shows us that it's nigh on impossible to reach herd immunity, so it can't be vaccination alone, can it?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. But you know, herd immunity in its absolute sense, meaning we can remove all other public health measures. But if you leave in place pre-departure testing, post-arrival testing, if we still quarantine anyone that hasn't been vaccinated or people coming from higher risk countries, if we still have people scanning into, when they go into stores and restaurants and so on, although we're atrocious at doing that at the moment, but if we could do that better, if you put those sorts of measures in place, which are, I guess, largely acceptable to the population and the community, then that may be enough to be able to effectively contain COVID, even though you don't have full herd immunity.
What are you telling businesses to expect around the border over the next few years?
So my message to businesses is, I, like everyone, want the border to be opened as quickly as possible. I would hope that, early next year, end of this year, we can start opening the border or start to reduce the quarantine requirements for low-risk travellers. So they'll be vaccinated travellers going to and from low-risk countries. What I'm equally saying to businesses, though, is, these variants seem to be occurring with increasing regularity and frequency. You have to plan for potentially a new variant coming along that the vaccine isn't effective against, and we have to pause everything until the vaccine is adjusted. So the key to businesses is you have to plan for a whole range of scenarios, because none of us can sit here today and guarantee what the world is what COVID is going to look like in 6 months' time or 9 months' time, or probably even 3 months' time, to be honest.
So, Rob, are you saying they should be fully prepared for a complete shutdown of the borders once again, maybe in a couple of years' time?
I'm saying everyone needs to understand there's a risk that the borders will need to be shut again. Once they open, there's a risk they'll need to be shut again at some point in time. And my message would be, as a business person, you don't just plan for a single scenario or plan for a scenario of hope that the borders will open. You have to look at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scenarios that are possible and then make your assessment of which ones are most likely. But you have to plan for multiple scenarios. And, if you asked me 12 months ago, I would have expected the borders would be open by now. But, things change.
We've been speaking to businesses who are finding it really hard to get spots in MIQ, businesses who want to travel to trade shows. They say a lot of their business comes from those face-to-faces offshore. They can't get back into the country because of MIQ. Your brief is a continual improvement. They'd like some spots ring-fenced for business that they can apply to a board for. Is that a realistic wish, and can you do anything to help with that?
I can't offer an immediate solution to that problem. I'm one of those people actually that needs to travel offshore in November for business, and I can't currently get a slot in MIQ. It's incredibly frustrating, and of course the challenge, if you look at the next months to be released, which is November and December, we'll have a lot of New Zealanders living overseas wanting to come home for Christmas. It's going to be incredibly congested, and it's probably, the two biggest issues I hear from the business community at the moment are that one, because their fear obviously is as the world starts to open up, it restricts the competitiveness if we can't get people into those markets. And the other issue also linked to MIQ is labour supply, right, which is causing significant issues for a number of businesses in New Zealand trying to access international labour, particularly in critical roles at the moment.
So should the government look at adjusting those settings for MIQ for business?
I'm advocating to say we need a long-term solution for MIQ, and I think we need something more than requisitioned hotel rooms. And we're seeing a number of countries now around the world now starting to invest in dedicated MIQ facilities. I think that's absolutely something we need to be exploring as a country.
And that was Rob Fyfe, and he's the government's COVID business advisor. And just to confirm, MB, who, is in charge operationally of managed isolation and quarantine, they have said to us there is currently no specific allocation for business travellers in MIQ at all, and they declined to talk to us or be interviewed about the possibility of creating allocation for businesses. It is 16 minutes past 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rā watu mō te whakarongo mai, homai o whakaro. We would love your feedback on this one. Is it time for purpose-built MIQ, and where should it be built if that's what we're going to do? Also interested in your comments there, Rob Fyfe pointing out that there's probably going to be an influx of Kiwis wanting to holiday back in New Zealand over Christmas. Should they get the MIQ spots, or should priority be given to businesses and people living permanently in the country? Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Our Heidi Akine will have more on the huge strain COVID is putting on Fiji's medical services. Now, a quick traffic update before we move on. State Highway 1 is closed at Tiro after 2 trucks crashed this afternoon. Police say the road will be blocked for some time, but detours are in place. Expect delays if you are heading through there. The Trans-Tasman bubble will reopen for Western Australia and Northern Territory from midnight on Friday, but will stay closed for Queensland and New South Wales. New Zealanders stuck in those states won't be stranded though. From the same time on Friday, they will be able to board green flights as long as they meet certain conditions. Speaking a short time ago at Parliament, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and COVID-19 Minister Chris Hipkins laid out the extra layers of protection.
Not only are those who are in affected parts of New South Wales have been in a lockdown now for 14 days, we're requiring them to get a pre-departure test, and we have listed that they cannot travel if they're in any way connected to the current outbreak. So there are layers there that we require of them to give us extra added satisfaction that they pose minimal risk to New Zealand.
By way of analogy, when we reduce our alert levels here in New Zealand. We don't require everyone to get a negative test before they're allowed to go out into the community again. So we are applying a higher threshold to those who are in that position in Australia where they've been isolating for 2 weeks. They still have to have that negative pre-departure test before they can come back to New Zealand.
Indeed, travellers coming from any Australian state will have to test negative for COVID-19 before boarding a plane. The travel pause with Queensland will be reviewed on Wednesday, but will remain in place for New South Wales indefinitely.
I think we've been clear all the way through that it is flyer beware, and I think people expect that now. They know that there is an element of risk. We do our best, of course, to maintain the flows, but if there is a risk to New Zealand, we won't hesitate to shut down those borders.
Te Piremia Jacinda Ardern. The vaccine rollout in rest homes has been likened to a postcode lottery, with residents in Nelson Marlborough already fully vaccinated, whilst others in Waitemata are only just receiving their first jabs, despite all being in Group 2. Continued delays over vaccine delivery in some areas has also led to residents missing out on a flu shot while they wait. And as Louise Tanuth reports, those working in the industry say that's not good enough.
We're in touch with our membership, and we knew of a handful of rest homes in a couple of DHB regions last week where they hadn't yet started the first doses. That's really concerning. Again, we would have expected this to have been all done by now for what is a very vulnerable group of older New Zealanders.
CEO of the Aged Care Association, Simon Wallace, paints a grim picture of the vaccine rollout in rest homes. Latest numbers from the Ministry of Health show 225,000 people aged over 70 have had their first Pfizer vaccine, whilst just under 117,000 have received their second Pfizer vaccine. Rest home residents and staff across the country are supposed to be in Group 2, but Simon Wallace says some rest home residents are frustrated to see some people in Group 3 jump the queue. He puts that down to a DHB postcode lottery.
We had some really good areas, like Nelson Marlborough was a standout region, and they had essentially completed all their vaccinations of staff and residents by the end of April. But then we've had the likes of DHB regions like Waitemata, which, as I say, have only just started, and at some rest homes have only just started in the past week or two.
Simon Wallace says if aged care homes knew the rollout would take so long, they would have given flu jabs to residents sooner. But as a cold snap sweeps the country, some have gone without. Elizabeth Knox Home and Hospital in Epsom has just under 500 residents and staff. CEO Jill Woodward says the delays have been very stressful.
I was fielding many inquiries, and we'd started off informing people that in April it was going to start, and starting to get consent forms completed, etc., and then just to go nowhere with it. And unfortunately, we were never told of a firm date. We never had certainty until just some days before the first vaccination was to take place.
Jill Woodward says her residents were finally vaccinated last month, 2 months later than originally scheduled. Down the road at Avonlea Rest Home, Facilities Manager Vanita Fever says residents received their second Pfizer vaccine last Friday, but not all of her staff.
Some of the staff are quite hesitant at this point in time to get it. And then there are staff who are older, who are 60 plus, and they don't want it. They know the consequences that they might not be able to work with the resident face to face once they don't, because if they don't get vaccinated, they can't work with the residents.
Vanita Fever says the case of an unvaccinated student nurse in New South Wales working across 2 hospitals whilst infectious has her worried about what might happen here if some of her staff aren't immunised. She's given them until the end of the month to book an appointment. Meanwhile, 150,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine arrived at Auckland Airport yesterday afternoon. Chris Hipkins says this means no DHB will run out of stock, which would have happened by Wednesday if the shipment hadn't arrived. But the chair of the New Zealand Medical Association GP Council, Vanessa Wienick, says that's cutting it too fine.
It sounds like they're running on a form of logistics called sort of last minute or just-in-time logistics. And that's stressful for everybody. I heard the Minister Hipkins say that it keeps him awake at night. And frankly, if we've got any situation where we've got to have a minister so worried about the delivery of something, it shows that they're really getting too far down into the weeds.
And to strengthen the vaccine rollout, she wants GPs involved and an alternative to Pfizer as a backstop if we run out.
I think once primary care is involved, the vaccine rollout will run a lot faster and smoother as long as we've got good supply. And if we don't have good supply, or if they prove to be less reliable on this first drop that we're expecting millions of doses, then we should have a contingency plan for another vaccine.
And it's not just the rest homes. Other people in priority group 2 say they are still having issues getting booked in for their COVID-19 vaccines. Ko taku manuhiri nai nei, ko Nick Trubridge. Well, he's been out talking to Aucklanders outside vaccination centres this afternoon. And right now he's outside the Manurewa Marae, which is one of 4 vaccination sites in South Auckland. Kia ora, Nick. What issues are people there having?
Hi Lisa, yeah, well of course the call has gone out for people in Group 3 to sign up for their vaccinations, but there are lots of people here today in Group 2 who haven't got the call and have had to come here off their own back to come and sign up and then eventually get a vaccination when it's available. So there's also been the issue of people calling that 0800 number and not being able to get through. There was one particular gentleman who said he called a number of times in the last couple of weeks, still couldn't get through. He was here this afternoon coming and signing up himself, hoping to get it in the next few days.
And what about access to vaccination centres? Are there enough?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Lisa, because there was another couple of gentlemen out here today from the Somali community. They had travelled here from Mount Roskill. They came and they told me they were trying to figure out, A, when the elderly people in their community could be booked in for a vaccination, but B, whether there were going to be more vaccination centres that would open up closer to Mount Roskill. Of course, you will have seen in the news over the recent days there have been 4 more vaccination centres open up with the arrival of Group 3, places like Pukekohe, places like Tamaki. But in terms of places like Mount Roskill, Grey Lynn, still a few question marks over where is the closest place to go. If you just bear with us for a second, we will have a look at what those 2 gentlemen from the Somali community had to say and what the other Aucklanders who were here today had to say.
Yeah, we have some community elders and those people, they waiting, some time, and some people, they don't know the, vaccination centers since the vaccination is not available in that area.
When I got sent the original text, it was like the beginning of May. I had managed to log onto the website. I thought I'd booked it, but it turned out I hadn't booked it. I rang them back because I never heard anything back. And I finally got this appointment today. So,
do you know what grouping you were in? Whether it was
supposed to be in the I was actually supposed to be in the over 65, living here in Clendon, which is supposed to be the original South Auckland group. You know what I mean?
That's supposed to be Group 2, isn't it?
Yeah, that's supposed to be Group 2. Yeah.
I had to cancel my booking because of my knee replacement. And then when I rang up, we had no problems getting a booking.
What grouping would you have been in?
1. Group 1.
I'm supposed to be at the group number 2, but for whatever the reason, probably they didn't keep me in that group, so I chased them a little bit. And I called the 0800 number a couple of times. They couldn't book me in, so I walked in over here, just check and made an appointment just by myself.
Do you know what group you're in, or you just show up?
Oh, I just show up. I didn't know what group I'm in, but this is my first shot.
And Nick, what more do we know about those 150,000 vaccinations that arrived in the country today?
Hi Lisa, yeah, so we know the quantity of vaccinations is increasing to cater for the current demand, but there will be another shipment or another plane load of vaccinations coming in at the end of this month to cater, to pick up the number of vaccinations available to meet the current demand for the rest of Level 3 and Group 3 and obviously going into Group 4.
Nā mihi mo te rā e ho, that is Nick Trowbridge, who's outside Manurewa Marae there. Ho mai o whakaro, we would love to hear from you on this one. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. What I want to know is what group you're in. If you're in group 2 in particular, how have you found getting access to the vaccine? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 28 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Public frustration over mixed messages from the government is growing in Fiji as COVID-19 continues to spread rapidly. The latest daily update saw another record infection rate with 522 new cases. Making the situation even more grim is the main mortuary is full and people are being told to make immediate plans to farewell their loved ones. Johnny Blades reports.
A startling announcement from Fiji's Ministry of Health. With the mortuary at the main hospital now at full capacity, relatives have to make plans to uplift their deceased family members and arrange funeral rites. There have now been 30 deaths since April. With hospitals unable to cope, health authorities have sent many of the people infected with COVID back home to isolate. The opposition National Federation Party leader Biman Prasad says that means some are going to multi-generational, overcrowded households.
With the increasing number of cases, our health systems are giving up. The whole system is stressed up. People with other kinds of illness are being affected. They are not able to get the treatment that they ought to get. People are dying on arrival, or people are dying even before they get to the hospitals.
The deteriorating situation in Fiji is failing to sway Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama from his no-lockdown stance. In a bid to save the economy, his government is allowing some businesses to stay operational. So while Fiji's Secretary of Health is advising the public to stay at home, the Trade Minister is talking about retail businesses, restaurants and gymnasiums staying open as long as safety measures are followed. Biman Prasad says the government's mixed messages and business-as-usual approach have caused a disaster.
The situation is going to get worse. And it is not too late for this government to change its strategy, to stop being arrogant about what they have decided before. And if you look at the numbers, which have risen exponentially, it's only happened after the Prime Minister made the decision to open up the containment zones.
Meanwhile, some Fijian workers are forced to continue going to work despite the rapid spread of COVID in the wider community. A retail worker in Suva, who doesn't want his name used, says he still has to go to work on reduced hours. The father of 5 says it's critical that he earns money to feed his family, even though community transmission is rife.
Numbers going up. Yesterday it was 500. The numbers keep going. I don't know what this government doing. They're even not doing any nationwide. We're having a lot of pressure. Our families, no food, lot of things, man.
Public adherence to the safety measures remains mixed. It's not helped by slow communication from authorities over which areas have been designated red zones, according to Ellen Turkington, a social worker in Lautoka, who delivers food to families in need in informal settlements.
We just deliver food and people say, we've been locked down. We try to get out of there as fast as possible. And the other thing, when we go to the informal settlements, and we see the people walking around with no mask and group all clustered together. And if someone should be sick there, no doubt, it will spread like wildfire.
If there's a ray of hope for Fiji, it's that the vaccination rollout is progressing swiftly. Over half of the eligible population have had at least a first jab of AstraZeneca, while around 50,000 people are fully inoculated. But the Delta variant of COVID-19 is moving quickly through Fiji, and calls for the government to exert some control on the spread of the virus by calling a nationwide lockdown are only growing.
E te iwi e haere nei e a checkpoint. Beware smart and more sophisticated cyber attacks. We'll have more on that from the government agency that guards against them. A record number of New Zealand kids are growing up in motels, and we should be ashamed, according to housing advocates. And the old Mataura mill is finally free of toxic waste. Ho mai o whakaro. Get in touch about anything you've heard on the program today. We'd love to hear from you. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines now, and you know what that means. Ko Susana anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The Prime Minister says New Zealanders stuck in New South Wales and Queensland must test negative for COVID-19 before they're allowed to return home from Saturday. The government says Cabinet has agreed to reopen parts of the Trans-Tasman bubble from midnight on Friday, with quarantine-free travel with Western Australia and Northern Territory. But Jacinda Ardern says the travel pause with New South Wales will remain in place for the time being. It will review travel with Queensland on Wednesday. People who normally reside in New Zealand will be able to return from the two eastern states from Saturday as long as they test negative before departure, are non-symptomatic and are not a close contact or visited a location of interest. Meanwhile, the government's own COVID advisor says he would like to see border restrictions relaxed by the end of the year. Former Air New Zealand boss Rob Fyfe told Checkpoint getting everyone vaccinated will allow the country to open the borders. Rob Fyfe says the flip-flop of borders opening and closing was not helping businesses operate consistently or plan for their future. He says businesses also need to be prepared for the borders to snap shut at any time. The Director General of the Foreign Intelligence Agency says cyber criminal gangs are attacking supply chains of software as opposed to individual companies or organisations. Hundreds of groups and companies were hit globally by the attack on the Kaseya software. Government Communications Security Bureau Director General Andrew Hampton says such incidents are becoming more sophisticated. Police are investigating whether multiple firearms found after a raid on a Black Power-linked house near Wairoa in Northern Hawke's Bay are linked to a spate of shootings in the area. There's been 5 incidents with guns fired at homes around Wairoa in the last month, with tensions heightened between the mongrel mob and Black Power. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Eho. No mai hoki mai, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko taku manuheria nai nei, ko Nona Peltier, because it's business o'clock. Nona joins us in the studio. I'm really interested in this story, Nona. Economic divide between the north and south regions, and it's getting wider. Northland's top dog.
Yes.
And Southland, last place.
That's
so what's
right.
going on?
Okay, so these numbers are distilled from the GDP numbers for the first quarter of this year. And so the ASB does this every quarter. They call it the regional scorecard, and then basically rank the different regions. They've put Northland top for the 3rd consecutive quarter, whereas Southland, Otago, and other parts of the South Island have been down along the bottom there. Southland dropped a couple of points, in fact, to the 16th position, which is the lowest rung, whereas, I say, Northland has maintained it. Now, probably one of the big reasons is logs, that Northland is doing really well out of forestry. They're also doing better than the South Island for tourism. And that's because most of the population is in the North Island. It's easier to get in your car and drive up north or wherever you'd like in the North Island.
And maybe they like warmer temperatures, Nona.
Well, it could be that, although I personally have been spending my holidays down in the south, and I can say that that's a really lovely place to visit. However, it is more expensive if you're going to drive, and so it's not as easy. That's what the chief economist at ASB felt.
More expensive, sorry, if you're going to fly down south, you mean?
Well, if you're going to drive across with the ferry or whatever.
Gotcha.
So it's not just like you can't just park your, get in the car and drive down to the South Island without, incurring some expense. So that's one thing. And as long as the international borders are closed, it's expected to continue in that vein. Now, we did get a message from someone who lives in the South who said, where did you get these numbers from? That's not correct. Now, keep in mind, these are first quarter figures. This is the 3rd quarter of the year.
There's a lag.
There is a lag. And one of the things that Nick Tuffley said was that the South would improve with those better and improving prices for commodities. And that's perhaps what we're seeing there. So it's not without hope. These are historic numbers. They're just just more a matter of marking time, I guess, in what's going on with our economy. And he didn't feel that things would change much until those borders reopen.
Now, shares in Auckland Airport soared today. What?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a funny segue, isn't it? Well, it turns out...
Well, you're talking about tourists, and we've got an airport that only has not so much. So why are the shares going gangbusters today?
Well, because in Australia, a consortium has offered, wait for it, $8.25 Australian a share, which is a 42% premium to the previous closing price for Sydney Airport. And that comes out to just over 22 billion Australian dollars, or nearly 25 billion New Zealand dollars for this airport. Now, the airport are like, whoa, wait a minute. That's still not really a very good price, because it's not our pre-COVID price would have been much, much higher. And that's still open to, for consideration by the board. And maybe there's going to be a better offer out there now that the door has been opened. So it remains to be seen how that goes. But Australia, Sydney Airport, remember, New South Wales right now,
it's not going great.
It's not going great. The New Zealand airport, which is Auckland Airport, is more highly rated than Sydney. So that caused investors to go, hey, we might be undervaluing our Auckland airport. And that drove up the price 5% to $7.61. That's a gain of 39 cents today. And so it remains to be seen what's going to happen. But this offer means that there will be some due diligence. There will be, a value placed on Sydney Airport, and that is going to reflect, of course, on Auckland Airport.
Okay, well, let's take a little ticky tour around the other numbers.
Well, so that helped drive up our index, 0.8%, 100 points up to 12,812, knocking on that door of 1,300 again, 13,000 again, rather. The New Zealand dollar was boosted over the weekend to 70.2 US cents because of the labor market data that came out of the United States. That kind of quelled fears about interest rates going up higher than sooner than later, that sort of thing. And that helped our New Zealand dollar as well as the Australian. Against the Australian, we pegged where we were before, 93.3 and 50.8 British pence. That's it.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with business there. Schools are offline and more than 100 North Island kindergartens are back to pen and paper due to a major international ransomware hit. The GCSB is monitoring the situation and says people should be concerned by a recent cybercrime surge. Katie Todd reports.
The sophisticated cyber attack is believed to have started with a Russian hacking group. It infiltrated a software called Kaseya, used by some service providers that supply companies with IT infrastructure. The attackers claim they've infected more than 1 million systems globally, stealing data and encrypting it. Hundreds of Swedish supermarkets and American businesses were hit. Here in the lower North Island, the Free Kindergarten Association, Whānau Manaki, has confirmed it's impacted, and in turn more than 100 member kindergartens. Its chief executive is Amanda Coulston.
We've just given the message through to our kindergartens and to our staff that no laptops or computers should be booted. Everyone should keep their laptops and computers off. And that if they need to communicate, they do it through the iPad. And so that just gives us time to work through it all and just identify if we have been compromised or not.
Maclean's College in Auckland knows some of its data was compromised, but Principal Steve Hargraves says it's dodged a bullet. Only one server was affected, containing data about the school's assets that's already safely backed up and publicly available.
If it does get posted online, I guess it would list all sorts of buildings and vans and, computers and things that the school owns. I'm not sure that that's too big a deal. We're a public organisation. All of our accounts and, balance sheet and everything's publicly notifiable. It's listed on our website. People can come into the site and look around and see what we own anyway. So I don't think it's too big a deal.
Steve Hargraves says that's not just down to luck, but a well-resourced IT department and staff who are well-schooled in IT risks.
Well, interestingly, we have been targeted before, and in fact, we get quite a few of those spam emails that we know are phishing for our information.
The Ministry of Education says 11 schools were struck. 2 were okay because they hadn't used Kaseya for some time. 2 have been impacted by ransomware, but without any evidence of data loss. 7 couldn't find any signs of ransomware, but have shut down services as a precaution. St Peter's School in Cambridge had no website, online student workspace or email account today, although students are on break. In a statement on another web page, its chief operating officer said they were recently backed up, so the school was confident it could recover its data. The GCSB is monitoring the situation and working with affected organisations. Its Director General Andrew Hampton says ransomware attacks are moving up the supply chain, attacking software suppliers rather than individual companies, so they have wider impacts. He says businesses need to know how to continue if they're locked down.
I think everyone needs to be concerned about the changes that we've seen in the threatscape, particularly the fact that we're now seeing criminal actors with capabilities that were previously just the preserve of state-sponsored actors.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also recognising the need to act at a national level.
This is something that we want to continue to reinforce, that we at the Centre is doing as much as we can to support those organisations that are critical, but also encouraging the private sector to make sure that they are up to date in all of their cybersecurity protocols to ensure that they are well protected.
There were sighs of relief at IT security firm Code Blue as it investigated its network of customers who use Kaseya and found none that appeared to have been affected. But General Manager Daniel McIver says he's unsurprised by the attack. A competing product called SolarWinds was hacked last year. He thinks a rigorous approach to security is the best way companies can protect themselves.
We recommend a layered approach to security. For example, the Code Blue organisation uses 7 different layers of security products. So yeah, they're very, very cautious. And at the end of the day, take good backups of all your systems and data in case the worst thing happens.
Waikato University law professor Al Gillespie believes the best way to protect against ransomware attacks would be an international treaty, ensuring the people behind them get held to account.
We definitely need rules in this area so that we can get more stability and we can hold those who do these crimes accountable. But at the moment, there is no international rules.
Other companies that use Kaseya and aren't sure if their data has been compromised are urged by cybersecurity watchdog CERT NZ to use an online tool to scan their servers.
Cabinet Minister Kiri Allen has returned to Parliament after taking time off to have treatment for cancer. The Minister has been documenting her time in hospital on social media to raise awareness of cervical cancer and has received a warm welcome back from her boss. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
After announcing her stage 3 cervical cancer in April, Kiri Allen dived straight into chemo and then radiation. Her treatment was supposed to take 6 weeks, but due to complications it was extended to 9 weeks. During that time, Kiri Allen says her 3-year-old daughter was a constant source of light.
When I came to think about the things that were really important to me, I went to write a list, and all it was actually at the top of that was seeing her get to her 21st, perform her first proper kapahaka competition, not these kohanga reo ones, I mean, up on the big stage. Yeah, those were the things that were really important to me, and that was the thing that caused the most fear, was not being around, or maybe not being around for her.
She'll still need medical checks every 6 months, but Kiri Allen is feeling stoked to be back.
I'm free from all of my cancer-related treatment, so I'm not on any medication any longer. And yeah, the body is feeling a lot better today than what it did prior to taking leave. The pain's gone, and that's been something that's I've really welcomed. I didn't know that I was living with that much pain until it's gone.
The East Coast MP has been encouraging other women to smear their mere. During her treatment, she received many messages from hundreds, if not thousands of people who had got a test.
And then when those tests for some came back abnormal, it meant being there and for those that felt a little uncertain. And when those results again came back with perhaps cancer results, it's meant that I've been a friend via the internet for those that are going through that process. But it's a really scary journey at all stages. And I think bringing awareness to the complexities that come, it's not just a physical thing, it's mental, it's spiritual, and it does, in my case, it really relied on a whānau to be able to support me through that.
And her wider parliamentary whānau too. She received a warm welcome from her cabinet colleagues at her first day back around the table.
To have her just walk back into cabinet and take her seat and just resume the position that she had was a really fantastic moment for everyone, and all of her colleagues were very, very pleased to see her back.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has given Kiri Allen back her responsibilities in the Conservation and Associate Environment portfolios. But for at least the next few weeks, Chris Farfoy will remain the Emergency Management Minister.
The National Emergency Management portfolio, which Minister Allen is absolutely exceptional at, is also a very demanding on-call portfolio. So at any time of day or night, a minister can be called to action, as we've seen in the past.
The Prime Minister says it is her intention to return the role to Ms Allen in the coming weeks.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And a lot of you getting in touch about our interview with Rob Fyfe, who's the government's COVID business advisor. He reckons we should have purpose-built MIQ because this is a problem that's not going away. May says purpose-built MIQ? We don't even have purpose-built housing for those that need it. I love the optimism but doubt the realism, says May. Another listener says, of course the government should be building purpose-built MIQ facilities. Minimum of 3 in the North Island and 1 in the South. COVID will not be the last virus that brings our country to lockdown. Sue, however, has got in touch and says businesses just need to use their brain cells. If Rob Fyfe thought the borders would be open by now, he clearly should not be in the position that he is in. Louise writes, good to hear Mr Fyfe emphasising the need for more flexible long-term plans for our businesses in a COVID-dominated world. What Kiwi business science innovations might be out there to support our number 8 wire creative approach to finding solutions? We need more info on the vaccine strollout, Louise calls it, and specific targets and delivery dates for vaccines. Hipkins suddenly casually mentioning the new Janssen vaccine causes confusion for Kiwis who are trying to get their heads around the relative merits of Pfizer over AstraZeneca. Thanks for all your feedback. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. He muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, the massive spike in the number of kids living in motels, despite the government's promise to crush child poverty. Across the Tasman now, where the decision to slash the number of international arrivals by 50% is weighing heavily on those still stranded overseas. It's also causing heartache for Australian citizens who are at home but whose foreign partners can't get here. The ABC's Rhett Burney reports.
This wonderful moment today of joining your lives together in matrimony.
6 months into her fight against stage 3 aggressive breast cancer and fending off the side effects of another brutal round of chemo, Melbourne woman Juliet Wilson, whose partner David McNeil is stuck in Canada, slipped into her wedding dress, stood in front of her laptop and married him.
I now pronounce you husband and wife.
The accomplished Canadian-born businesswoman has been an Australian citizen for 25 years. Next month, she'll undergo a double mastectomy.
Going through chemo alone has been horrendous enough, but looking at 6 weeks where I won't be able to do the basic things to look after myself, it is completely distressing.
Juliet Wilson won't be able to lift her arms for weeks after her surgery. She'll need help getting to the toilet, showering, dressing, cooking, and even feeding herself. Her husband has been granted an Australian visitor visa, but because of the pandemic, he needs an exemption from Border Force to come into the country. He's been fully vaccinated and has no issue doing the 14-day mandatory hotel quarantine. But Border Force has rejected his application for an exemption 4 times.
There was no explanation with the rejection as to what our application was lacking. It was your application has been rejected, do not reply to this email.
Dusan Nikolic is the couple's immigration lawyer. He believes Border Force doesn't recognise their online marriage as legal.
That was addressed in the most recent application by the jurisdiction in which the marriage occurred and a specialist in Australian family law, and both confirmed that the marriage was valid under Australian law.
Dusan Nikolic says even if that weren't the case, Border Force is ignoring its own policy to let loved ones of Australians in for compassionate and compelling circumstances.
It's difficult to imagine more compelling circumstances than the one that Juliet finds herself in. If her husband's unable to come to Australia, so she's facing the prospect of having to recover on her own, and I think that's just unacceptable.
A Border Force spokesperson said the department couldn't comment on the specifics because of privacy laws, but that spouses of Australian residents are exempt from travel restrictions and can enter Australia. Dusan Nikolic says if that's the case, Juliet's husband should already be here.
We're certainly seeing a tightening of travel exemption approvals over the past 2 to 3 months, and that coincides with Australia's lagging vaccine rollout and the pressure that the Commonwealth government has been under.
Juliet Wilson and her husband have appealed this latest rejection, but she says time is running out for him to get here and finish hotel quarantine before her double mastectomy.
England's about to move into a period without legal restrictions. Instead, the public will have to exercise personal responsibility, including on face masks. All legal restrictions are expected to be lifted on July the 19th. The BBC's Chris Mason reports.
From the cobbles of York to the Minster, England wandering back to normal as the government suggests legal rules around checking into cafes, wearing face masks and such like are likely to go in a fortnight.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I'm not sure masks have been necessarily a great idea in the first place.
Personally, I probably won't wear it outside, but I will continue to wear it in shops and in closed spaces.
Well, I don't think it's a good idea because I think it's going to bring a bigger risk of another spike.
From a cabinet minister today, this message about the next stage.
It does look as if, thanks to the success of the vaccine programme, that we now have the scope to roll back those restrictions and return to normality as far as possible. We should all be prepared, though, that cases may continue to rise. They may continue to rise significantly, but we do now have to move into a different period where we learn to live with the virus, we take precautions, and we as individuals take personal responsibility.
For the best part of 18 months, we've all had to get used to an unprecedented squeeze on our liberties and the imposition of all sorts of rules, like wearing face masks in shops that would have seemed bizarre just a couple of years ago. What we saw there from the minister was the strongest indication yet that so many of these rules are about to be swept away in England. Why is the government sounding confident? The number of coronavirus cases is going up. The number of people ending up in hospital isn't rising anywhere near as quickly.
The link is not totally broken. There are people in hospital with who've been vaccinated, but it's severely weakened. So, of course, the key aim now is to get as many people vaccinated before July the 19th.
Labour wants to get rid of rules too, but
it is important that if the QR codes are going to stop, if the masks are going to come off, that we are absolutely confident that that is the right thing to do. And at the moment, all we're hearing is briefings from ministers rather than the science behind it. We need to see that science.
The Prime Minister will explain the government's thinking, its direction of travel in the next day or two. Separate decisions will be made for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
Here, kōrero ngā hautine. This next one is an interesting one. The star player at a weekend footy game came off the beach rather than the bench. Some of the primary school-aged players abandoned the field and parents scattered when a sea lion waddled up from Dunedin's Tomahawk Beach and onto Ocean Grove Sports Ground, disrupting two children's footy games. Bradley Scott was on the sideline as the pitch invasion unfolded.
I was like, oh, shoot, people are moving, and then, oh, there's a sea lion there. And it was by all their gear, all their warm-up gear. And so they tried to get everyone sort of backed away, but they tried to get the game underway. And then once the game was underway, it looked like it wanted to join in. So then it would get up from its spot and try and sort of edge a bit closer to onto the field. So then that game stopped. A few people tried to scare it off, and that didn't really work. So then they decided to move pitches. And then when they moved pitches and got their game back underway, it then decided to join in again. I don't even know if it was a boy or a girl, to be honest. I don't know my biology that well of sea lions. But it just wanted to join in, I think. Yeah.
How big is this thing? Because, they're quite big units, aren't they, compared to your players?
Oh, definitely. I mean, they were 9-year-olds, so much bigger and certainly wider, far bigger girth than a 9-year-old.
Pretty personable, though, or did it have a bit of a grump on?
Oh, there were a lot of dog walkers as well, so it had a wee bit of a grump and probably didn't take too kindly to trying to be shifted. I mean, it's not the seal's fault that we've put a sports ground next to its habitat, had we? So, yeah.
So in terms of trying to move the sea lion on, what were some of the techniques used?
Some tried to, clap at it to get its attention. Some tried to get a bit closer to it to try and make it follow them, which I wasn't a part of. I don't think that's the smartest idea. I mean, I think the best thing in that situation is to do what they did eventually and move the field. And then it came onto our field. So there are actually 2 games that were disrupted by the sea lion. And then the most successful thing was actually another member of the public, the father of one of the other, or grandfather of one of the other teams, grabbed quite a long branch that had leaves on it and sort of shook the leaves at it from a safer distance, I guess. And it sort of sniffed at the leaves and then would sort of move back. And he managed to coax it off in the space of about 5 to 10 minutes. Actually managed to coax it off the playing area. Yeah.
So Bradley, truth be told, were you a little bit scared of this thing?
I mean, Dunedin might see quite a lot of sea lions nearby. Since the COVID lockdown, actually, they've come back to St Clair and St Kilda Beach and that, which are really popular sites, and people are generally pretty respectful. Obviously, if they're game of football on and you've got spectators and children and so on. My daughter, she was the goalie. She actually abandoned the goal and took off. She was a bit scared, which I can understand from the 9-year-old's point of view, but I didn't feel threatened by the sea lion. I was, respectful distance, and just you wait and see what it did, really.
How did the other kids react? So she gapped it, but what about the others?
Oh, yeah, as you can see from the photo, everyone sort of backed off and just wait to see what happened, really. But, no, people were pretty respectful. I think most Dunedinites now are used to seeing seals and sea lions around, so let it have its space.
I reckon someone should have tipped the ball in its direction. You never know what kind of moves it would have. A lot of you getting in touch about the vaccine rollout, and you're in high priority groups 1 and 2. Some of you had problems actually getting your vaccination. Tony from Timaru says, I'm group 2, 62-year-olds with a compromised immune system and compromised respiratory system. I'm also an essential worker and work in a high area, an area with high exposure risk. Yet to get invited to do anything. That from Tony and Timaru. Another person says, I'm in group 1, had my first vaccination at the end of May, but when I went to book my second within 3 weeks, the June-July calendar said no appointments available. And I have to wait until August. That's interesting because it's supposed to be a 3-week gap in between. Someone else says, my mother's 83, can't operate a cell phone or a computer, recently had a stroke, no contact for a vaccine.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Trans-Tasman travel bubble is up and running again for 2 Australian states. The travel pause with Western Australia and Northern Territory will be lifted from Saturday. New Zealanders trapped in New South Wales and Queensland will also be able to return from Saturday as long as they meet a number of conditions. But Cabinet has extended the travel pause with New South Wales indefinitely. Passengers must test negative for COVID-19 before departure, be non-symptomatic and can't travel if they are a close contact or have visited a location of interest. Maclean's College in Auckland says some of its data was compromised in a global Kaseya ransomware attack, but it has dodged a bullet. The attack is believed to have been carried out by a cyber criminal gang based in Russia. Principal Steve Hargraves says only one of his school's servers was affected. He says it contains data about assets and is safely backed up and publicly available.
If it does get posted online, I guess it would list all sorts of buildings and vans and, computers and things that the school owns. I'm not sure that that's too big a deal. We're a public organisation. All of our accounts and, balance sheet and everything's publicly notifiable.
Steve Hargraves says the school is aware of IT risks and staff were prepared. Some Fijian workers are forced to continue going to work despite the rapid spread of COVID-19 on the country's main island. There has been another record infection rate with 522 new cases and 3 more deaths reported, taking the toll to 30. A retail worker in Suva says he is working reduced hours, but it is critical to earn money to feed his family.
Numbers going up. Yesterday it was 500. The numbers keep going. I don't know what this government doing. They're even not doing any nationwide. We're having a lot of pressure. Our families, no food, lot of things, man.
The father of 5 says safety measures are being followed at his work. Police have seized multiple guns and arrested one person after a raid on a house linked to the Black Power gang in northern Hawke's Bay. It was part of a special operation to disrupt gang violence in the area. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
In the last month, there have been at least 5 shootings where guns have been fired at homes around Wairoa. In one of the events, 2 children were asleep in a house south of the town when it was fired upon from a vehicle. The children weren't injured. In the most recent raid on Friday, police found 3 rifles and a semi-automatic 12-gauge shotgun. They arrested a 27-year-old Black Power member. Police are investigating where the guns came from and whether they have been used in any of the recent shootings.
Some GPs feel they have to jump through hoops to inoculate their patients against COVID-19. A shipment of 150,000 Pfizer doses arrived in New Zealand yesterday, just a few days before DHBs were set to run out of the vaccine. Spokesperson for the Medical Association, Vanessa Wienink, says general practitioners wanting to administer the vaccine face a complicated process to get signed off.
GPs and our nursing teams, we do the majority of vaccines in this country as it is. We have annual cold chain accreditation already, and to be kind of needing to get some random tick in the box to be able to do this vaccine is just slowing things down.
Vanessa Wienink says GPs just want to get on with immunising people. Meanwhile, the former Air New Zealand boss says it's time to look at purpose-built facilities for managed isolation and quarantine. Rob Fyfe says the current MIQ settings are affecting international labour coming in and the government should consider adjusting them.
We need a long-term solution for MIQ, and I think we need something more than requisitioned hotel rooms, and we're seeing a number of countries now around the world now starting to invest in dedicated MIQ facilities. I think that's absolutely something we need to be exploring as a country.
Rob Fyfe says a graduated risk profile might also be applied, meaning borders will be open to different people depending on whether they're vaccinated and where they're from. State Highway 1 at Tiro in Waikato is closed after a serious crash between 2 trucks. The road is expected to be blocked for some time. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it's fantastic to have Cabinet Minister Kiri Allen back at work. Today was Ms Allen's first day back at Parliament after undergoing 9 weeks of treatment for cervical cancer. Ms Ardern was pleased to see her take part in today's Cabinet meeting.
To have her just walk back into Cabinet and take her seat and just resume the position that she had was a really fantastic moment for everyone, and all of her colleagues were very, very pleased to see her back.
Jacinda Ardern says she has decided for now to let Chris Farfoy continue to fill in as Emergency Management Minister. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Warriors' newest recruit prop, Matt Lodge, says the New Zealand NRL club wasn't his first choice, but a cut-price deal takes the pressure off his arrival. Lodge joins the Warriors from the struggling Brisbane Broncos and could play this week against the Cronulla Sharks. The 26-year-old's partner is the daughter of Warriors recruitment manager Pete O'Sullivan, but he had previously turned down the Auckland side.
This time around, he gets me, a bit under half price of what that deal was, so that takes a bit of pressure off. With Broncos paying a fair bit of my salary, I get to come here. Not a whole heap of pressure on me and just slot in at a reasonable wage and do my job. Feels a lot more comfortable than coming here as family on the big kind of dollars.
Matt Lodge was sacked by the West's Tigers in 2015 after he was arrested in America. World women's tennis number 1 Ash Barty will attempt to reach the Wimbledon quarterfinals for the first time tonight, but will have to get past the French Open champion to do so. Barty meets Barbara Krejcikova in the 4th round. The 14th seed came from nowhere to win at Roland Garros last month. Barty admits she knows very little about the Czech.
She's had an exceptional last couple of months, and have played her plenty of times in the doubles court, but never on the singles court. So it's a new experience for both of us, and some new challenges that will force some of my best tennis, and I'm looking forward to that challenge. I'm looking forward to trying to figure out her game and kind of piece together the puzzle that she presents.
Also in action tonight are Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Canterbury University sports scientist Professor Nick Draper on addressing one of the biggest headaches in New Zealand sport, concussion from rugby. Shannon Byrne talks sport from hopefully just out of lockdown Darwin, and sci-fi correspondent Eleanor Tremere joins us from Vancouver, where the weather's been anything but normal. She wants to talk about fiction inspired by climate change on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Partly cloudy, areas of fog, isolated showers north of Waikato today, spreading everywhere tomorrow morning and turning to rain tomorrow night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, partly cloudy, showers developing tomorrow night. Gale northerlies developing tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Buller, a few showers developing tonight, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury, high cloud, severe gale norwesterlies developing tonight, scattered rain developing tomorrow afternoon south of Christchurch. Otago and Southland, cloudy, occasional rain developing tomorrow morning, snow lowering to 400 metres tomorrow night. Westland and Fiordland, heavy rain spreading north tonight, easing to isolated showers in Westland tomorrow night. Snow lowering to 400 metres in Fiordland tomorrow night. And Chatham Island, cloudy periods with a few showers tomorrow evening. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Nā mihi Susana, no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, called Lisa Owen tēnei. The number of kids living in motels has reached a record high despite the government's pledge to combat child poverty. Latest figures released to Checkpoint show there were more than 4,300 children living in motels at the end of March. That's jumped nearly 500 since the end of December. It's a figure housing advocates say the country should be ashamed of, and they have solutions at the ready. But the government says the spike isn't representative of an overall trend, and they're working hard to get the numbers down. Nita Blake-Person reports.
It's the problem this government promised to prioritise: child poverty. 368 children living in motels like the Northerner here in Kaitaia. The problem is still all too real.
Of course, there are families here. Yeah, there are single mothers and, one family's got 3 children.
Serafina Lay is the manager and has seen plenty of kids come through. It's not just happening in the north though. Latest figures at the end of March show the number of kids living in motels right across the country jumped by 480 compared to the end of December. Serafina says that's because whānau have nowhere else to go.
At the end of the day, I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm just here to help and support them. Yeah, so, most of these mothers here, they're just trying the best for their children.
But on the very same street, just a 2-minute walk down from the Northerner, Ricky Houghton has a very different solution to the problem. The Whare Ora Papakainga is a rent-to-own social housing scheme run by He Korowai Trust. The houses here are former Auckland state homes, which would otherwise be taken to the tip. Instead, Ricky is buying them using a trades academy he's set up to bring them up to scratch. Then they're put on trust land with 27 homes so far on the first 5 acres. There's a preschool on site. The houses come with milk, bread, budgeting and pastoral care, addiction support and a community garden.
The houses that we are refurbishing and recycling and relocating are houses that have done 50 years. They'll do another 50 years. They're the sorts of homes that we want our children to run to, not from.
The homes are for the most vulnerable whānau. They pay $380 a week for a 3-year trial to live there. If they progress, it's $380 each week for 15 years to own their own home. Houghton says it makes a lot more sense than the $280 a week being paid for motel rooms down the road.
Motels were never ever designed to house children. I accept that the government has tried to fix a emergency chronic situation, but where there's a smarter alternative and affordable, sustainable alternative that should be given a priority.
The houses are costing $180,000 each without land or infrastructure. The government has funded 50% of the development so far, but Houghton says with more cash, the model could be rolled out right across Te Tai Tokerau and the rest of Aotearoa.
I've asked the government for $22 million and I can put 800 homes in Northland that would otherwise be landfilled. I've asked the government, give me $22 million and I'll never ever come back to you again, and I can fix the housing crisis in Northland.
While $22 million may sound like a lot, it's useful to remember the government's spending around $1 million a day at the moment on motels. But Houghton says his request has gone nowhere.
The response is deafening. If the government keeps on paying emergency accommodation, I can get rich and I can feed off the poverty of these families. I can quadruple my balance sheet if I wanted to. And I could just empire build, just like a lot of other people have chosen to do. I want the dividends to go back down to these families to give them financial head start on things.
The Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, won't make any guarantees.
Well, I think he is in some conversations at the moment. I'm certainly not going to guarantee Ricky Houghton funding over the phone here, although I do respect the work that he does. But what we did see at Budget 2021 was an additional $380 million invested into 1,000 new homes for Māori, including Papakainga housing. We are being very deliberate here and very much focused on innovative ways, as I said, to work alongside iwi and hapu to house whānau.
As for the increase in kids living in motels, she says it's a selection of data from a point in time and the figures fluctuate.
So we'll keep watching the space, but you have to watch it for a period of time to be able to ascertain whether or not there is a trend.
The Minister says overall emergency accommodation spend and demand dropped over the last 2 quarters, and the government remains committed to building more homes so motels aren't needed in the future.
Relief for residents in a Southland town after confirmation that all 10,000 tonnes of toxic aluminium waste has been removed from its old paper mill. The dross is an aluminium byproduct from the Tiwai Point smelter and had been stored in Matauda's disused paper mill for 7 years. Anei te kairipoata a Ananzaki.
For Matauda local Laurel Turnbull, today's news has been years in the making.
I don't have to worry about it anymore. I don't have to be contacting people to see where it's going or what it's doing, I knew where it was going. But it's a huge relief for everyone in Mataura, and not just Mataura either, further downstream in Wyndham and all the smaller towns where the river runs through.
The Environment Minister David Parker announced this afternoon that all of the dross stored at Mataura's disused paper mill has been moved and stored in watertight shipping containers at Tiwai Point. The last bags were removed last Wednesday. The dross gives off a deadly ammonia gas when mixed with water. Heightening local concerns is the location of the paper mill, which is next to the Mataura River. Flooding in 2020 put residents on edge, with locals getting increasingly restless over the dross. Laurel Turnbull says locals have fought hard.
It's been a huge battle, and at times you just felt as though you were just banging your head against a brick wall because, everybody would, come up and say, oh, yes, we've got a solution, and then that would fall over.
The Gore District Council says the dross was dumped at the paper mill in mid-2014 under the cover of darkness by Taha Asia Pacific without a resource consent. In 2015, the company was granted a retrospective resource consent by independent commissioners who ordered it to pay the council a $2.3 million bond. The consent would have lapsed in January 2018, but the company appealed the bond and went into liquidation in August 2016, with the matter still before the court and without paying a cent. Minister David Parker confirmed today that the mining giant Rio Tinto will now pay the $6 million clean-up bill at Mataura. The news was welcomed by Gore Mayor Tracy Hicks.
Oh, look, there was no real justification in the local communities having to pick up that tab, but really we wanted rid of it. So to have that burden relieved is great.
The focus has now turned to removing the remaining dross in other parts of Southland, estimated to be around 12,000 tonnes. Sherry Chapman, who lives in Bluff, has been a vocal advocate of removing the dross. She's worried the authorities haven't yet planned the removal of the dross at a farm in Bluff.
Just in Bluff where I am, just north of it, there's a farm with a whole lot of dross on it. And for some strange reason, that hasn't been involved, that they haven't involved that person, and that stuff is still sitting on their farm.
Sherry Chapman says authorities must continue their work on removing the remaining dross, and they mustn't ignore the waste stored at the farm.
It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We've had a heap of you get in touch about our earlier interview with Rob Fyfe, and he is the government's business advisor around COVID issues, suggesting we should purpose-build MIQ and that vaccination could lead to some relaxing of border restrictions. This listener says, I don't know why being vaccinated is being touted as a green light to do away with closed borders when all the scientists are telling us that being vaccinated doesn't stop you getting COVID, or being a carrier, it only minimises the symptoms. There are other infectious diseases as well, though, that we can't stop altogether and we don't close the border to them, which is the likes of the flu. And I think the estimates were about 500 fatalities a year from the flu, so something to consider compared to COVID. Someone else says, instead of spending money on managed isolation, perhaps we should be building more hospitals instead. At least we would end up with better health facilities overall, and maybe learn to live with the virus like the rest of the world is, says Vicky from Christchurch. And this one too, I'm someone who has not been able to meet their 1-year-old grandchild, but I absolutely support the need for business people to have allocations in MIQ. I can't believe what I just heard about MB. How can they call themselves a Ministry for Business and Innovation? Jerry's got in touch to say, Kia ora, Lisa, the MIQ situation is also affecting those who are trying to permanently move their families home from overseas. Our son has been trying to get a vacancy for the last few months. When November and December are put up, they will be snapped up in minutes, and a lot of businesses and families will miss out. The system needs to be majorly rejigged. The angst out here over MIQ is something else. On a happier note, Paul from Auckland's got in touch to say, I'm an at-risk under 65-year-old. Got the first jab yesterday at Otara. Went like clockwork, says Paul. Staff all great and minimal wait. Thanks for getting in touch. We do appreciate your feedback. Be warned, cyber attackers are getting smarter and the attacks more sophisticated. A North Island Kindergarten Association is among hundreds of groups hit at the weekend by a cyber criminal gang believed to be based in Russia. The Reville group is believed to be responsible for the attack, targeting users of remote IT management software, Cassia VSA. Andrew Hampton is the Director General of the Government Communications Security Bureau, the country's foreign intelligence agency. He told reporter Katie Doyle the international threat-scape is changing.
A particular feature we are seeing, and this is relevant to the current attack, is actors compromising organisations that provide services to other organisations and then using that as a vector for attacking their customers. They're called supply chain attacks, and when you see criminal actors using that technique, the potential implications globally and potentially nationally are very significant, because you're not just talking about compromise of individual organisations, you're actually talking about potentially compromise of a whole customer set. I do think organisations need to be aware of the potential impact of a major cyber event on their services. That's why taking necessary steps such as those we recommend in our supply chain security guidance is important. Similarly, that's why organisations need to be thinking about incident response, because even if you have all the right protections in place, there's still a possibility that you may be compromised, particularly through a supply chain attack. So you need to know how to continue your business in the event that your systems are locked down. The Kaseya attack is an example of a supply chain compromise where a service provider organisation clearly has been attacked, and as a result it's provided a vector by which the actor can get to customer organisations. A number of New Zealand organisations have been impacted by this incident. At this stage, it's too early to determine either who the actor is or whether other New Zealand organisations will be impacted. But it's a main focus for us at the moment.
Is there anything you can say about talk that it might have been a Russian-based group?
It is too early at the moment to attribute exactly who it is behind the attack. What I will say is the distinction between criminal actors and state actors is becoming increasingly blurred, as capabilities that previously were only the preserve of state actors are now falling into the hands of criminal groups. We're seeing that particularly with these types of attacks which are focused on supply chains.
GCSB Director General Andrew Hampton talking to reporter Katie Doyle. Dozens of Indonesian health workers have died from COVID-19 in recent months, despite being fully vaccinated with the Chinese vaccine. Indonesia is one of several countries rolling out millions of doses of Sinovac to its population. Early trials of the drug last year showed mixed results on its efficacy. The ABC's Anne Barker has more.
On the same day she gave birth to her first child, UC Maya Susanti tested positive to coronavirus. The baby girl was just 2 weeks old when her mother died. The young nurse worked in intensive care at a hospital in Kudus in central Java, one of the towns worst hit by the pandemic in Indonesia. And yet she'd been fully vaccinated with China's Sinovac vaccine. Maybe she died from so much exposure to COVID, says her grieving husband, Ganang Aditama. All health workers here are struggling against COVID. UC Maya is one of a growing number of doctors and nurses in Indonesia who've died from coronavirus despite being fully vaccinated. Since February, at least 20 doctors and 10 nurses have died after getting 2 doses of Sinovac's Coronavac vaccine. Indonesia has relied heavily on Sinovac to vaccinate more than 1.4 million health workers. The Indonesian Doctors Association says the vaccine has still saved the lives of hundreds more health workers who fell ill with COVID-19 and later recovered. But some experts believe hospital workers at least should have 3 doses of the vaccine. Epidemiologist Diki Budiman, based in Brisbane, has helped formulate the Indonesian government's pandemic strategy.
They need another booster, so they will need 3 jobs for, let's say, Sinovac at least.
Indonesia is not the only country grappling with Sinovac's efficacy. Chile has used it to vaccinate almost 2/3 of its population, but is also struggling with a new surge in infections. Clinical trials had already shown mixed results for Sinovac and little about its impact on older people. And Australian epidemiologist Mike Toole at Melbourne's Burnett Institute says far less is known about Sinovac than any other vaccine.
All the other vaccines that we are using have not had these kinds of severe breakthrough infections.
For now, Indonesia has little choice but to rely on Sinovac to vaccinate the bulk of its population. Professor Mike Toole says Australia should now consider donating its unwanted AstraZeneca doses to Indonesia.
I think we will have at least double-digit millions to give away. Maybe that's a drop in the ocean, but it could also be a backup for healthcare workers.
The Vatican has indicted 10 people, including a prominent Italian cardinal, over financial crimes which involve embezzlement, money laundering, fraud, extortion and abuse of office. It comes after an inquiry into questionable investments found enormous losses of church funds. Here's the ABC's Nick Grimm.
Sunday morning in St Peter's Square, and the Catholic Church's 84-year-old pontiff addressed thousands of the faithful. Today I ask you to pray for the Pope. Pray in a special way. The Pope needs your prayers, he told the crowd. And while it later emerged Pope Francis was on his way to hospital for scheduled surgery on his large intestine, some in St Peter's Square might have wondered whether their prayers were needed as the Vatican deals with the growing fallout of the scandal that's hit the Church's financial affairs. Once one of the Vatican's most influential officials, Cardinal Angelo Becciu, is the most senior of 10 people set to be put on trial for financial crimes that have cost the Church millions of dollars. Jacopo Scaramuzzi is the Vatican correspondent for the Italian newspaper La Stampa.
The Cardinal is certainly at the centre of attention and will need the trial to show us exactly what he's done. He said today that he's the victim of a plot and media attack, but what is certain is that he's either an accomplice in this buying and selling scam or that he didn't keep an eye on the squandering of money in the Secretariat of State's budget.
The financial scandal relates to what's been described as a grossly overestimated real estate deal in a fashionable district of London. But beyond that, details are sketchy.
Well, they're murky to begin with, and they're confusing.
Robert Mickens is the international editor at the Roman Catholic newspaper La Croix, speaking here to RN Breakfast.
Basically, this has just been a very bad deal. I mean, if you want to look at it on the face of things, you could say that they weren't very smart, the people in the Vatican, in the way they went about this real estate deal. But basically, what happened is the Vatican invested in a property. They were losing their money, and they tried to get out of it. They tried to buy out one of the partners, and he is alleged to have extorted, tried to get money out of them.
It's been alleged the embezzlement and abuse of office charges laid against Cardinal Becciu relate to the use of church money to benefit businesses owned by his brothers.
The accusations against him was nepotism, basically, the embezzlement, that he was giving money to his brothers. But Pope Francis moved in September to sack this cardinal, who was one of his top aides. And in a sense, what he did was he's already sentenced this cardinal.
The trial will be conducted in a specially constructed courtroom at the Vatican and is set to get underway later this month.
In London, a hidden underground tram station is being opened to the public for the first time in almost 70 years. Although the site closed in the 1950s, it has been used as a film set. The BBC's Charlotte Gallagher reports.
When Hollywood producers wanted to remake the classic British television programme The Avengers, they needed locations to match the 1960s setting. At Kingsway Station in central London, they found the perfect vintage spot, with a bit of help from CGI, of course. The subterranean, disused tram station was opened in 1906, but was closed in 1952, after it was decided that trams were outdated and too expensive to run and maintain. Black and white photos from 1933 show men in trilbies waiting for the double-decker trams pulling in. Most people living in London have no idea about the hidden network of tram lines underneath the streets. Some have been turned into road tunnels, and remaining platforms have been used by councils to store old street signs and bins. Now Kingsway Station is being opened up to tourists and travel enthusiasts. People will be able to go down into the depths in August and September. It's not cheap though, with standard tickets costing more than $60.
That's almost all we've got time for. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a popo on First Up from 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. This is such an interesting one. From eating a rock to eating a sock to chowing down on a pack of sewing pins. It sounds like something out of Dr. Seuss, but no, it is the wackiest pet insurance claims from 2020. You will not want to miss that. 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Don't forget to check out all our stories online. Kei te hoki mai anō a popo whānau po Māori. We will be back at the usual time tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening and thanks for your company.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The travel pause with Western Australia and Northern Territory will be lifted from Saturday, and there is a way home for New Zealanders stuck in New South Wales and Queensland. Workers in Fiji say they feel unsafe and have no choice other than to keep working during the COVID-19 outbreak. The former Air New Zealand boss says there needs to be a long-term solution for MIQ facilities rather than using hotels. Maclean's College in Auckland says one of its servers was compromised in the global Kaseya ransomware attack, but it has dodged a bullet. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
When you shut the old year down, you let all the old stuff go and then you sit down and you plan and look ahead to the new year.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
Yeah, well, I am working on my memoirs and plugging away at that. You know, you have days where you write lots and other days where you're lucky if you finish a paragraph.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Karen, and I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National, which commences after the news at 7. Two guests in the first hour. First, Nick Draper, sports scientist, talking about concussion in rugby and ways of making rugby safer without maybe doing away with rugby altogether. And Eleanor